So before we start with the panelists around here, we spoke about the platforms and solutions, and I think a great introduction on how to use those platforms. But I think it's great to have a panel who are very experienced in putting a complete ecosystem of systems in front of customers, product development, or potentially also advising them on how to use it. So first, before we want to start, I want to take you the opportunity to quickly introduce yourself from right to left, or for the audience from left to right. So Patrick, maybe if you would love to start.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Patrick Attallah, I'm the Chief Data and AI Officer for NXP.
Thanks. Ralf?
Yes. It's on? Yes, it's on. It doesn't have the green light. My neighbors at that. So nice to be here. Really nice keynote. Thank you for that. My name is Ralf Zoetekouw. I'm the founder of Datacation, which is an AI-based company in Eindhoven and in Amsterdam. We have a team of 20 IT nerds with social character, we say, and we implement all kind of different AI solutions, from computer vision to large language models to optimization problems.
Yeah, and one of our residents.
And one of the residents of the AI Innovation Center, of course. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Prashant Mishra. I lead AI globally for Rackspace Technology, which is a multi-cloud company. So we provide solutions definitely for generative AI.
And Misja, yeah. You don't need to push the button. I think it's on.
All right, Misja Fockens. I'm part of Accenture Data and AI in the Netherlands. Background in quite a wide scope in data platform setup, MLOps services integration, but also involved in, especially the last 6 months, in generative AI implementations in large-scale companies, which is sometimes proving challenging with not just the technology piece, but also everything around it.
Thanks. Great. So AI in business, I think, what I first would like to ask on Patrick, right? So you have seen the presentation of the keynotes that we just have presented, but you're not selling a product yet, right? So you are an advocate in your own organization. So could you shine a little bit of a big difference on your role enabling AI with the platforms and tools in NXP?
I think that my role is to make sure that other than our 10,000 engineers that are thinking of using Gen AI and how to embed it into the chips moving forward, is to use AI in the rest of the organization, whether in fact it's supply chain, whether in fact in our digital go-to-market, and therefore making sure that you use it properly. It's very interesting to see a company like NXP where you have so much data, so much engineers, where in fact is in the rest of the organization, they're not using at all predictive analytics, only kind of like, business intelligence. So the challenge is kind of like to move the organization to start using predictive analytics and take the decisions and therefore the value, the impact around that. So that's basically, in fact, the big challenge that I have in front of me.
Yeah. And I think the biggest application we just heard was also in the top right corner of the circles, customer support, customer outcomes. Anything developments that you believe that your role, but also the platforms are pivotal for NXP?
No, I think that in fact is the McKinsey kind of like study kind of like shows 3 top ones, which is or the 4 top ones, which is very specific to NXP. I mean, NXP is like many other pharma company. We spend a lot in R&D, and therefore everything that in fact will make us, faster to the market. Time to market in terms of the chip industry is very, very important to stay competitive. And therefore is if you kind of like have 10,000 engineers and you can reduce by 10% the time of coding, that is a lot. So not just on the cost savings, but basically on the time to market. So that's in fact software code engineering, R&D, and of course everything that in fact is in sales and marketing in terms of documentation. So you have to understand that in fact companies like NXP and chips, we have lots of technical specification, technical documentation. So our kind of like prospect or customers are asking day in, day out of all this information. So having in fact a nipple kind of like will be great to be able kind of like to go and grab all this actual information and kind of like help our real employees, because we still need real employees to be able kind of like to go and deliver that faster to our customers and prospects. So these in fact are these actual 4 real areas where we are looking to gain in productivity. It's not yet there, but that's in fact the challenge that we have to go and overcome.
Yeah. What I particularly like about your answer is that it touched upon, I think, a very important element of our first panel is about business value. You articulate the business value very well, but also what I understood, Misja, is that you from Accenture are trying to build those capabilities into your organization, but it's going easy, right? So it's easy to put all the technology in place to start driving business value.
No, it's not easy at all, actually. So actually very recognizable that the for sort of engineering space is also something where you see a lot of companies struggling. So we are doing a lot of pilots with code generation, test data generation for software engineering, data engineering, cloud engineering. And while the technology works really well, we do have a lot of discussions around intellectual property, how do you secure it, and those kind of things. We also have a lot of engineers that disagree with the sort of code generation that the models do.
Yeah.
So yeah, the company might have different guidelines for coding. So we also have a lot of discussions there. And you see now that in a lot of pilots we started with the really well-known large language models, and now we're looking more at setting up smaller specific domain models just for these use cases. So that's one of them. And then we talk a lot to security and legal in these companies. So a lot of discussions going on there. Yeah.
So still an easy ride, right?
Not at all, no.
Not at all. And what I like about the conversations, right? So I hear designer productivity, sorry, developer productivity or R&D productivity. I hear here all kinds of what's called developments. If you are able to improve productivity by 15%, would you then compromise quality? Or how is the trade-off between quality versus speed of go-to-market in certain industries?
So your premise is that quality will be lower, or because actually we have done we have now implemented a project and we're using it Accenture internally, where the peer reviewing, which they used to do with 4 Eyes principle, so peer review, human review, we now automated most of that with trained LLMs.
Yeah.
Specifically on the guidelines that we have internally, and that's productivity increase, but it's also quality increase.
Okay, so
I think it's very important that I've been in talk with Accenture yesterday, in fact, specifically on that for 2 hours on Gen AI. I think that we have to pay attention to what we are trying to sell, because that's the problem I have, in fact, with my executive committee. Everyone sees productivity.
Yeah.
So, and therefore that means cost savings or going fast in the market. In software coding, even Accenture right now have not put it into kind of like production. They're still in a pilot phase. The reason, as you have said it, Misja, is that basically because of the actual legal implications. But most importantly, it depends on the persona that you have. If you have lots of junior code software developers, therefore that in fact will fit perfectly for them. Media, it's okay. If it's senior, they will never use it. So it depends in fact of who are the persona and for which type of use cases you're using it for software. If it's kind of like documentation for your software, that probably helps a lot. If it's core quality testing, depending in fact how, what in fact you're testing. So it's very simple to say it will kind of like gain you 10-15% productivity, but it depends company by company and persona. So we have to be careful of what in fact we're selling yet.
Can I elaborate on that? Because
yeah, sure,
I think it's a really interesting discussion about how to see the return on investment in a particular project. So to give a bit of background information, we are asked a lot by companies like, hey, how can we apply AI? It's really a technology push. And then we say, hey, we first have to walk with you for like 5 days to perform kind of a quick scan and to see how we can apply AI. But what we do in this quick scan is we look at the technical feasibility, because everyone thinks that everything is possible with AI. That's not the case. Second thing is that there should be a business case. And that's on your question, Sebastiaan. So we then perform kind of a ROE calculation, and we look first indeed at productivity. So most of the time it's labor costs saved, but also on employee satisfaction, because a lot of automated things, or a lot of things can be automated such that the employees can stick to the more fancy kind of tasks. And the third one is indeed the errors made. So humans make a lot of errors, and sometimes the AI can be really more sufficient, such that we calculate the return on investment based on productivity, less errors made, and also employee satisfaction.
And that's agnostic in every industry, or do you see differences between the industries?
No, that's really different indeed for all kind of different industries. So most of the times it's really easy to calculate those labor costs saved, but like errors made, then you really have to know what the company is currently doing how many errors are made, and what is also the impact of one error. And that's of course different for all kind of different industries and companies.
Thanks.
Yeah, and that's why I look at it from the risk perspective. It's a sorry. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's the green thing. Yeah. So I look at it from the risk perspective. So if it is a low risk kind of use case, right, then you can definitely employ this technology and have a better value out of it, right? If it is a high risk, then you need to look at it from the decision perspective. Are you right now, what kind of way you're making a decision out of it, right? Is it a kind of coin toss right now? Then any 51% accuracy model would be kind of better suited, right? So just look at it from the risk perspective, and that's why the use cases that you see here, that is, the customer interaction, where, let's say, in the off cases, if you provide a wrong recommendation to the customer, what will happen, right? And on the other hand, if you are looking at the autopilot cars, right there, if a wrong decision is happening, what will happen, right?
Yeah.
So I think you have to kind of look at it from the risk perspective and choose the use cases wisely in that sense.
Yeah, maybe I can add as well. So I totally agree on the persona comment, actually. So we're looking at the different types of engineering that you can do, and even my own cloud engineers internally call cloud engineering copy-paste engineering. So we've done some benchmarks there, and you see that's very repetitive, and the results are very accurate for code generation. But then if you talk about more embedded software, that's a different discussion, because it's more bespoke, it's very specific. Code generation there, in our experience so far, it's difficult to make a business case. But even there, you can look at, for example, peer reviewing the code with LLMs. But that's a less strong case. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Bringing it from engineering and development into, for example, blue collars and white collar employees. I would be very curious to understand, Patrick, from your side, where NXP has a large scale of blue collars. What is then the use cases then you would see there in that field, in your manufacturing?
I think that manufacturing, it depends whether in fact you want to become fabless or you continue kind of like have your own factories. I think that the issue is not really in terms of AI and productivity. It's more in terms of the data compatibility that you're going to go and get to be able to manufacturing faster. So having in fact a standard and harmonized approach to kind of like, share data between the different kind of like, manufacturing sites, because if you outsource 50% of your chips, you still need to be able kind of like to read this actual data for you to do and build any kind of like AI. So I think that the software coder, that's in fact where the community that in fact will be most impacted by potentially, Gen AI tools and LLMs moving forward. But I believe that it's not kind of like in a year or 2 or 5 years. I think it's going to kind of like, more in the actual kind of like 10 years to come, and not kind of like faster. The reason for it is that you still need to have critical thinking. You still need kind of like to make sure that in fact whatever is the result and the outcome is being checked by a human. So we have heard a lot about hallucination. You need kind of like to make sure of that. Secondly, if you develop a code, we're developing code and software and hardware on chips that's going to be used by customers. So this whole legal component needs to be taken into account. And today, customers are not yet ready to be able to accept you to kind of like to do that. However, they're asking us, and we have in fact customers, 2 weeks ago, kind of like says, "Oh, we expect you to give us the chip with the software, not only the hardware, but as well the Copilot next to it." That means that they would like to have as well a Gen AI tool that in fact is being provided as part of the actual full solution. So this, in fact, is new requests and new challenges that we're going to kind of like, deal with it. So that means that we still need a lot of our engineers to build, in fact, all the different solutions.
What triggers me is more like a general part is that the data that comes available, selling such solutions or working with, let's call it subcos that manufacture your products, you need the data. So what are then the implications for platforms and tools and legals between, for example, let's call it the one who manufactures your chips? How do you make sure you provide a seamless platform, make sure data is yours? Yeah.
That's the big challenge, when you have companies like NXP that are moving from hardware to hardware on software and therefore solution selling. It's the same kind of like, situation that, for example, Accenture that have in fact lots of software coders, but they are doing it for their customers. Using LLMs will put them in the situation where is, okay, we can do it for ourselves, but ourselves is basically this actual code is being done for a customer. So is the customer going to accept it? So we have to kind of like rethink totally the process of the legal component and how we can embed, in fact, these actual co-pilots into the actual solution, in fact, we're giving to our customers. We don't have yet the answer, but that's in fact what we're working on moving forward. And the first thing that we have started is by putting an AI advisory council, which in fact I'm chairing with in fact is 10 other kind of like colleagues that in fact are thinking of how we're going to bring that forward in the organization at all levels, either in terms of the R&D level as well as in fact is using it in fact internally. So enabling or kind of like using it and leveraging it.
I imagine a world where NXP sells the product, and I remember that I have a phone, and before I can use the product, I first need to scroll through a lot of lists of documents. I'm not sure what I'm doing, and then I push yes, 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 next, finish, and then I have agreed on some legal consequences. How would that work? We're moving into more like the legal consequences. You're selling no longer a chip, you're no longer selling software, you're selling a product, a platform, an ecosystem, a solution that's completely integrated, generating data, and influence decision making, breaking on time, doing something in the data center. What are your takes on that, Misja?
Well, that's a good question. So I guess a big part of this would be responsible AI, right? So intellectual property, bias, and everything that comes with it. So providing transparency on what your solution does. I think what a lot of companies are still missing is that they do talk about responsible AI, and they develop a solution, and they look at bias, and they look at IP infringement and whatnot. But we sort of forget that it should be sort of an ongoing process, right? So how do you embed that in your organization, and how do you also continually sort of validate that the outcome of your solution is still adhering to all kinds of policies and compliancy, not only in your internally, but also indeed towards the products that you serve. So that's at least a perspective.
Yeah. Prashant, maybe you have a different view on it? Yeah.
I mean, I would again look at it from the, so the way I've seen actually in the industry right now, usually people put it in two buckets. One is internal use case, and another one is external use case, external being external to customer. Right, in the internal, these kind of issues don't usually come up and are, again, in the low risk category. So that is the more kind of use cases which you can adapt really easily without worrying about a lot of the consequences which you mentioned. While in the external one, you will have to kind of take into account the guardrails and looking at, for example, what kind of data are you ingesting in it, any PII data which is being used to make a decision making, right? All of that needs to be considered before even you think about putting it in the public, right? So you do have to have those, guardrails in place to mitigate those risks.
I'm curious to the guardrails, because what I've learned, right, working with software developers, putting guardrails around software developments when they have an own laptop is very difficult. They will find a way to build their own solution. And even more importantly, I think what I heard this morning is that also the data and what it learns and hallucinates or develops is also continuously evolving. So how do you make sure that your organization or CDO like Patrick, make sure he has the right knowledge to put guardrails around some kind of organization? Or what's your take on that, Ralf? How do you make sure things are going in the right way rather than hallucinating business results and promising KPIs?
You mean for my projects at the customers or inside my team or where?
I'm very curious how your team hallucinates, but maybe they will use something for that, or more about your customer side. Yeah,
yeah, so the world is evolving very, very rapidly. Like every day there are new inventions, there are new AI tools available. So it's really our job to stay updated with all the latest kind of knowledge. Yeah. So that we do together with our team. So looking a lot on the news, on new tools that become available. So that's how we try to keep up with all the new inventions and stuff. So but that's a difficult job indeed. Yeah.
And Patrick, you're sending out POs to every new software vendor to get that software into NXP, and then someone will start using it?
No, I think that they are more kind of like knocking on my door and other people's doors every day. No, I think that the best approach that we had is back in April, and that was in fact is before I arrived, because I joined in fact NXP on May 1st. In April, in fact, our CTO and our chief legal counsel have decided to ban every Gen AI. So therefore, from an IT perspective, you couldn't kind of like join anything. That's it. Until we kind of like decide of how we kind of like make sure that we protect the crown jewels of the organization. As you can understand, is that there's lots of IP, and therefore how we can make sure, in fact, that the actual software engineer don't go crazy, because they need to go crazy. They need to innovate, and this is in fact what happened. They went crazy and says you cannot just ban in fact GPT. We have to innovate, and therefore I have been tasked, months after I kind of like came, is to set up a governance around it, and that we're just about to announce, in fact, that governance that goes into kind of like 3 phases. So first thing, what we have said is that the first 6 months, we cannot just open the Pandora box, because we need to learn. Not only me, not the expert, because expert, in fact, will know how to kind of like read it, but you need to make sure that, in fact, the legal people, the IP people, the risk organization, the internal control, and others, and even in fact the technology, even in fact as the data scientists, don't understand fully how in fact these LLMs in fact are working. And therefore what we have done is that we have created an AI advisory council that in fact will take all decisions on the tools and the use cases, and we have created a generative AI policy which in fact put categorization of whether in fact you can, or it's banned, or restricted but. And therefore we have the same thing in terms of the actual data, what data can go in. But the data go in, the output is more dangerous sometimes than the input. And therefore, you have to go and pay attention to that. And therefore, what we have done is created as well AI audit team for segregation of duty, just to make sure that, in fact, through the whole life cycle of the generative AI tool or use case, they kind of like audit at all time. With a central registry where we have all the actual tools and use cases, approved or unapproved, that are documented. That enables us to have transparency internally. And after the actual first 6 months, we'll be able kind of like to release and have, in fact, what we call AI trusted advisors in the business line or the business unit and in the functions. That becomes, in fact, the first line of defense, and we'll be able kind of like to work more, and we kind of like open up a bit more on adjacent use cases and adjacent, in fact, tools. And the third phase is after a year, is we are kind of like a bit more kind of like clearer. You have to understand that these actual Gen AI are becoming, as the theme of this actual conversation, embedded. That means, in fact, today, SAP S/4HANA will have Joule, embedded into it. You got, in fact, if you have Informatica, that in fact we're using for our data governance and marketplace, have a GPT, announced for, February. You have, in fact, Salesforce that, in fact, is integrating, in fact, now GPT into it. So you're going to see, in fact, lots of this actual nipple, as we kind of like see earlier on, integrated, in fact, into the actual day-to-day.
Co-pilots, right?
Co-pilots that you have. Now, these co-pilots are great, but we don't know what type of information they gather from you. If you read, normally LLMs, they'll be able to kind of like understand the behavior of each user. So they will not know I'm Patrick or Misha or what have you, but they will know my behavior. And therefore, if they know your behavior, it's the same thing as what Facebook told us a few years ago. Privacy is being kind of like, is protected. But they'll know all about you.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we're seeing, in fact, as a result of it, 6 years or 10 years after. We will be in the same situation in 10 years with LLMs? I don't know. And that's, in fact, where the difficulty that you have as, one, I'm a technology optimist. I love, in fact, technology. But at the same time, is you have to look as well as how can you protect your competitive advantage, your IP, okay, than going away. How can you make sure that, in fact, is that today, if we are a first mover, they're not going to use, in fact, this LLM and use it, in fact, with my competition, Infineon, because I've been, in fact, using it for 6 months. They'll have, in fact, competitive advantage because they have learned about all the actual prompting they have done, and therefore they'll be able to use it, in fact, and they'll have a better version than the one I had 6 months ago. So that, in fact, is competitive advantage for the same price. So these are the questions that we have to go and put into an advisory kind of like council and kind of like learn from it, getting, in fact, experience, so, in fact, take the right decisions moving forward. Long answer, but that's in fact is what we're doing.
And what's the current state now at NXP?
Yeah. That was also my question.
There are three layers, and you said first we ban out
We're starting now
OpenAI,
with the first one. We're launching, in fact, the AI Advisory Council in November, and therefore be able kind of like to take decisions so we can have like release mainly kind of like, testing and evaluating on the software coding. And, with one or two use cases on the actual document or knowledge management for sales on public data. And all that is being done in a clean room. That means there's no kind of like, there's no connection to the real data. It's really kind of like clean rooms for us to learn and to see, in fact, how that. Then we don't have any kind of like, it's all kind of like based on RAG, so retrieval automated generation. So basically is that, in fact, it's really kind of like no learning from the machines at this stage. That, in fact, will come into the actual second phase. So we really kind of like is going. We want to go through it. It's being pushed. I mean, the business line wants kind of like to go and use it. And what we have find as well, and finish with that, is we talked earlier on about LLMs that are specific into kind of like finance or legal. I believe that, in fact, LLMs will not kind of like be specialized and deliver good results unless they are industry-based. So we've been kind of like testing the bedrock of AWS or the Copilot OpenAI of Microsoft versus, in fact, is LLMs that are specialized in semiconductor. So they have, in fact, all the actual user guides that you can find, in fact, on. Yeah. So therefore, the data sets is much smaller because it's not the whole internet, but the result is 70% better than the other ones because they are specialized. They have, in fact, the right ontology. And therefore, it makes you kind of like is thinking of where do you want to put your energy of evaluating, the tools. So instead of going kind of like having 5 of them, you kind of like focus only probably on 2 of them. Yeah. And I think, believe that the result will be, like Nipple said, is that you will not be using one, you'll be losing multiple, depending of what exactly you're trying to go and accomplish. So if you want to have a digital worker that, in fact, knows everything about your company, you might kind of like use 2 or 3 LLMs and not only one.
Thanks. I agree with the part about we will need LLMs which are specific to a particular industry because the vocabulary and the words and overall space itself is different, right? And that's why when we had models from, let's say, OpenAI, the Bloomberg came up with the new model which was exactly for the financial kind of regime, right? Because there the similarities between or the distance between the words is different on how you communicate. Usually, like for example, a company is laying off people might be seen as bad from the outside, but financially it's better for the company, right? So there's like a totally different kind of representation of language. If that is existing in a particular vertical, then we need a different model. Yeah. But yeah, usually I think that is very limited, as in the information that you see in the internet is common for most of the businesses itself, right? And the concern about the data itself not being used for the other company, I think there we need to have a distinction between the apps which are public, right, or Copilot which are private, as in only for you, right? So I think we need to have a distinction between that and see which data is being used in those models. Is it being also retrained and provided to other users as well? That kind of concern, I think, need to have a look and make a decision on.
Moving from how to make it available into your organization, I think it's interesting. Things triggers my mind when I think like, how do you make sure that individuals in your organization has the right information to take the right decision? Augmentation is like raising my kids. Try to give them the information in the hope they will take the right decision. It's often not the case due to all kinds of reasons. More importantly, right, so what I feel, Patrick, when you're presenting, and this is a question for you, Misja, is guardrails, letting things go, putting first line, second line, third line of defense / management in place. I'm curious to write your tools later on. But I feel also that it requires a huge investment. So how do you make sure that you will outperform your businesses and your competitors, but still have a positive ROI?
That is a really good question. I'm not sure if it's specific to Gen AI or AI, but exactly. So, I think it's a difficult balance. However, we do see in my experience, we have done pilots, also really projects that went live now in a relatively short time frame, usually on less sensitive data that do have a high ROI. Because one of the benefits of those wider foundational models, instead of more industry-specific models, is that it's very easy and quick to start. So for more generic use cases, I would say, back office, recruiting, HR, we do see a high ROI. The way that you estimate your value case, track value over time, I think is no different with AI than any other business case, to be honest. But maybe an example that I can mention is we have used GPT, I think 3.5, to do job matching, so vacancies in companies compared to candidates being available. Of course, there is a big discussion around how you handle that data, right? Because you're looking at resumes. But we have done job matching there to sort of reduce the workload in matching people to open vacancies. We're using Gen AI to review vacancies because the company that we did this at, the people writing the vacancies are not always great at English. So we do scoring of what is the quality of the vacancy, is it complete, those kind of things. And that was set up really by someone in just a few days. And there's I think about 50 people involved in that recruiting department, and it saved them a lot of work. So that was a really small effort with a high ROI, which this of course is a small scale, but it's the same indeed with software engineering. It's a very complex domain, but if you do make it successful, you can have a very high return, especially if you have 10,000 people working in engineering. So. Yeah.
I think that at the heart of any data strategy should be the use cases, and therefore that's in fact what I have really deployed at NXP, is that it's very easy to go into the technology and do proof of concepts, but you need to kind of like start first. There's no such a proof of concept. You have to have an MVP in mind. You need to have in fact an MVP that's be scaled, because that's in fact where the value is. So if you start from that, where's the pain point that we're going to try to do? So if in fact documentation of software is very important, it is a pain point of software engineers, therefore is that there's a solution out there. If Gen AI will bring it, great. Let's kind of like move forward, but that you have to really think value first before kind of like thinking technology. Yeah. That doesn't mean that you don't have to innovate, that you don't have to try. But in general, you have to think, if you're going to deploy massively, is value first and technology second.
A general question for you all, and I think Misha answered already that he has ROI. So, Ralf, did your company already, I think the answer would be yes, otherwise we're out of business, but did you show any ROI? Or do you have projects where there is no interest in ROI, but maybe a larger use case was human health? Or?
Yeah, so indeed, we are doing a project together with UMC Utrecht, where we earlier and better diagnose pancreatic cancer based on CT scans. So that's a really great social impact project. But there they also say, like, hey, when you put together the 10 best oncologists in the world and you give them the same CT scan, 5 of them will say that it is tissue, littekenweefsel, and 5 of them, scar tissue, thank you. 5 of them will say that it is a tumor. So also for the best oncologists in the world, it's really difficult to make a distinguishment between what is scar tissue and a tumor. So they give us a lot of free space where we can make our own models, and they already say, like, hey, when it's indeed like flipping of a coin, when we can improve this with like 80% accuracy, we already gained 30% of accuracy. So that's so there are like companies and organizations that really want to be like the first companies that do something with AI, but also the low-hanging fruit companies, the more low-hanging fruit projects that we are involving. For example, we also have a lot of projects with large language models. This is a company in the shipment industry. They get a lot of orders, but they don't have a prioritization, so they can only handle 30% of all the inquiries that are incoming. Sometimes they get an inquiry of selling a motor for like 1 million euros. Sometimes they get an inquiry and it's only about a small part for like 10 euros. So what we are doing is we get all those informations via websites, via PDFs, via email, and we're looking at, okay, how can we make with business logic, make a prioritization about what is the most important incoming inquiries, because nowadays they are handling this via FIFO, first in, first out, so they are missing a lot of valuable information. So we're using large language models to interpret all those kind of incoming text, and then make a prioritization about, okay, this is the 10% inquiries you should directly tackle. We also make a connection with the inventory, such that they directly, the people of sales can directly tackle those kind of questions. Yeah. So that's really a big return on investment for them. Yes.
So if you want to start experimenting in a big company, is it possible to start experimenting with data sets that you basically close off? I thought you mentioned the clean room. I like the word. But is that possible? Because that in a big organization is sometimes a thing. You immediately connecting all kinds of data, it's going to create all those issues that you also encounter. Is that something that you have examples of bigger companies that you then at least can start experimenting with, maybe use cases that create value, but you don't run the risk of connecting too much, which increases the effort, but also the risk of all those concerns that you then need to start addressing?
Yeah. So, like I said, some companies come to us and say we want to apply AI. Also, bigger companies, and then we say, okay, first, what is the business case? What do you want to achieve? What is the end game? And then they say, we don't know yet, but we want to apply it. So then we say, okay, let's start.
Is it possible to isolate data, start training on that? So you basically circumvent the issue of a big company where you have all those data concerns.
If you take, in fact, for sales and marketing, this is in fact exactly what we did. So basically, in fact, you can have, in fact, Copilot or Bedrock, from Microsoft or AWS. And we have on our website lots of, in fact, documentation that are in public available. Exactly. And therefore, this is, in fact, how you can, we can augment our customer service reps or account managers that are kind of like looking for information and to be able to summarize, a documentation and send it, for example, through an email or what have you. Mm-hmm. So it's always being checked by a human, but behind it's being assessed, in fact, by a Gen AI. Mm-hmm. So this, in fact, is where you can put it in a clean room because the actual information are being scanned anyhow by the GPTs of the world. So this information are out there. And doing it through, in fact, is a clean room. You'll be able kind of like to use a RAG, which in fact is retrieval augmented. So that means, in fact, you limit, in fact, the learning. So the model is not learning, is only kind of like parsing the document and kind of like help you kind of like find the information. So that's, in fact, is a way where you can do it in a clean room and have, in fact, a perfect good use case that then after that you can scale, moving forward. For software coding is a different issue because therefore here you have to go and kind of like, use, for example, Code Whisperer of AWS and you have to see, in fact, all the implication that you have in there. So that, in fact, is a longer pilot that you have to go and take.
Well, you can apply the same thing with the code thing as well. You don't have to use the Code Whisperer, but rather use the retrieval augmented generation to generate the code, right? Yeah. Whatever code base that you have, you extract the relevant code from there and generate based on that. So that's same concept can apply to the code as well. So
yeah, and in my experience, it also depends on the kind of data and the use case and the company itself as well, right? So there are a lot of companies that are fine to use cloud and also cloud LLMs that are available. Of course, the private versions that don't learn from your company data. And most companies have data classifications, right? Top secret, company secret, confidential, restricted, and maybe even public. I think most companies don't put the top secret data in cloud. So we do avoid certain use cases because of indeed confidentiality of the data. But we are also having discussions about top secret data in companies. But then you do look at using maybe open source models and deploy them on-premise or in factories. On data centers within the factory premises and keep it on premise. Yeah. So that's
interesting. Like company I work for, even last 2-3 weeks, it's a huge. Nothing works anymore on the private laptop. WhatsApp, everything is taken off. So like in a very high speed. So there's also this other trend of protection. Well, similar like NXP, so there is this concern. Yeah. This of course is a trend that we then need to. If you want to start experimenting with this, we should, I guess. You need to be able to protect your information.
Yeah, maybe
I need to be very, very mindful because otherwise I will the other program will start in 4, and I need to be mindful because otherwise we'll see other people running away.
I do have one thing that I very short, because we've been talking about policies and rules and whatever.
Yeah.
But we haven't spoken about just literacy training, right? So
we didn't have any time yet.
That is a big part. So.
Yeah. I think the conversation can continue for more than hours, right? Because I think this is very interesting. If I need to conclude this conversation, right, we are now at a point in time where we don't have yet all answers. Because we want to win, we want to enhance. I started this morning with a presentation called Enhancing Your Performance. You want to be better than the rest. So you need to be mindful in giving access to all kinds of tools, platforms, knowledge, and etc. to make sure that you are better than your competitor. However, that is also by using those models, there's a risk of losing, let's call it, what is you want to protect, your IP or your knowledge and your skills and competences or even your people. And I think that's what we don't have yet a solution for. I will be curious to reach out to Patrick in 6 months from now, what his ROI will be after his big first endeavors. But first of all, I would like to say thank you, Patrick, Ralf, Prashant, and Misja for presenting here and giving your answers. I could expect there are a lot of questions, and I've asked them to be available at the booth for 15, 20 minutes after this session. So feel free to just approach them and ask the real difficult questions that you didn't dare to ask now. Yeah? But first of all, I say thank you very much for joining, and I would love to see you next time. Thank you very much.